Welcome to the Sermon Podcast from First United Methodist Church in downtown Bentonville. If you have questions related to what you hear today, or just want to find out more about the ministries at First United Methodist Church, please visit us online at fumcbentonville.org or check us out on Facebook, Instagram, or TikTok. This week's podcast begins with a clip from a short video that was aired during Sunday service.
Arrived at the church, obvious damage all over the place, trees down, everything else, had to reroute like 5 times coming here. But the interesting experience was pulling up and initially thinking that everything was okay in regards to the sanctuary. And as I was doing a walk around the front corner here at 3rd Street and Elm, we had this really nice sign that was in masonry, and the sign itself was totally blown apart. So all these massive stones, we're talking, they're heavy. It's a solid workout to try and pick one of them up. This archway of stone that was holding a metal sign in place had totally blown apart. I looked at the church steps, and the south-facing doors were fine. They were locked. Nothing was wrong with them. But our east-facing doors, when I got to those steps, I noticed that there was this big cross that normally sits on our usher stand in our narthex, and it was sitting outside, which I knew it shouldn't be outside. So I walked up closer to the door and realized that it had been pulled open. What we think happened that caused the damage in here to the sanctuary was that the tornado passed overhead, headed east, and it sucked the doors facing east open, tore the doors open even though they were locked shut and everything was locked down. And a pressure wave moved through the whole building that shut fire doors, all that kind of stuff upstairs. The roof of the sanctuary on that corner, the opposite corner, pressure brakes blew off, and then this stained glass window actually got sucked into the room. It was like somebody had put a string right to the center of it and yanked it to the point that it came out like 12 inches or so, a foot. And the woodwork's actually still out of plane right now. That's what all that bracing's for. But that was kind of the day of. Everything else was a barrage of. We locked down the building as best as we could to make sure that everything was secure. There was no power or anything like that. There wasn't power around most of the town. Some church members helped secure the doors that had been blown open because they were ripped open so violently that there was no way to actually get them to stay shut. We had to board the doors shut in order to keep everything safe inside.
We didn't really know what had happened, but it's hard to even describe. It was crashing, breaking of wood, breaking of glass, the house shuttered. We didn't know what had happened, but almost immediately it was outside air and insulation blowing around our feet. And rain. So we knew something bad had happened, and at that point we went downstairs.
Flew downstairs.
Yeah, we flew downstairs at that point. The guests were already up, and she was trying to text me to tell me to come downstairs, but her text wouldn't go through. And then we just waited for the storm to pass. I think Brad went upstairs first.
We waited about 10 minutes, and then I'm like, surely it's gone by now. And I went upstairs with one of our guests and looked down the hallway with my flashlight, and I could see a tree hanging in our bedroom. And then I looked in our daughter's room, and there was a tree hanging in her room. So I knew it was bad.
He came back downstairs and told me our bedroom's gone.
Yeah.
And
it was gone.
I was like, what does that mean? So we tried to go outside and look around, but it was so dark. All we could really see was just trees down everywhere. We couldn't really see.
We couldn't get out the front door without ducking under the tree that had fallen from the back of the house all the way to the front of the house. And there was water gushing into the basement, and we thought it was from the rain because of the storm.
I quickly got a phone call off to my sister and brother-in-law who lived not far from us, and to my mom, telling them that they needed to take shelter immediately as well, and then grabbed our dogs and went downstairs, underneath the stairs, I should say, downstairs, and we watched the storm roll in on TV for as long as we could, and then the lights flickered, and then the power went out, and then it just got really loud. I mean, we even in our basement, it sounded like we had just a tin roof above us, and hail that rained down for what seemed like forever. And you really couldn't hear anything else at that point in time. So that was pretty scary. And then that part passed, and I called my sister back from the basement room, and she said that they'd been hit. And that was pretty scary.
Got everything plugged in and ready to go, and it was like 11 o'clock at night, which is late on a Saturday night to be dealing with things, and I just collapsed in my bed, happy and exhausted and still in my clothes, thankfully, because about 1 o'clock in the morning, she called me and said, there's a tornado and we have to go. We have to get to my son's house and get in the basement. And so I hopped in her car and we went over there and we got in the basement, and I met some new people who had been strangers but are now family. And I sat there with my phone watching the track of the storm and watching so many of you in the path. And I remember how scared I was for all of us. We got the all clear, but the all clear was not really true, was it? It was very clear that we were not going to gather in this space for worship that morning, but I had to find out what I was going to do, what I was going to say, and how to find you all. Sometimes I think when we read stories in the Bible that we struggle to relate to them because they talk about things that are not in our everyday lives anymore. And Holy Week is no exception to that. I mean, we don't really celebrate big things that happen in our community by grabbing branches and waving them in the air. We are Christians, not Jews, so we don't celebrate the Passover meal. Yes, people are still arrested in our world, but not with people who carry swords and not with those who represent the Roman Empire. We don't tend to have trials that involve both religious and state authorities at the same time. And we sure don't get to just trade criminals. We don't see people whipped. People don't die from crucifixion. Curtains don't just rip themselves in half. It's strange. It was really very strange until we went through what we went through a year ago. And I started to think, well, if I don't drill down to the specific details, but I think about the experiences that happened in Holy Week, then most certainly we know what that week felt like. For instance, I don't know how many of you drove down Central Avenue and paid attention to the canopy of leaves that had been over us, sheltering us and even calling out about the glory of creation. I didn't really notice them until they were at my feet all around me, dying in the heat. And I watched as authorities were scrambling to get everything back into order and pleading with people to please make reasonable choices. Choose for the good. And I certainly felt the palpable feeling of a people scattered and separated, of family divided, and the experience of some who were right in the center of the disaster and some who were watching from just outside, adding to that pain of separation. Knew what it was like to feel trapped, to feel as if the world had become a prison, and certainly to feel a world that was overwhelmed with fear. Even as we talk about the two events, we can think about them in similar ways. When we listen to Reverend James Churlog talk about the pressure wave that just flew through First Rogers, imagine the pressure wave that flew through Jerusalem in Holy Week. And when we talk about the loss of power, there was a very real reality to that, right? We did not have electricity, but without electricity in our world these days implies a lot of other kinds of losses of power, losses of the ability to find the people that we're trying to find, to continue to work, to even feel a sense of routine and sanity, to keep our food cool. All of that fell out of our control. We lost power in different ways than just the absence of electricity. And certainly there was a tension of loss of power that Holy Week. The disciples who had felt like they were the big men on campus, right, as they walked through and palm leaves and cheers, then to turn around and be the subject of a manhunt. They've lost their power. Religious authorities were scrambling to maintain their power. Government officials were scrambling to maintain their power. There were all these power vacuums that were at work in Holy Week as well. We all felt the weight of wood. Luke is one of the Gospels that talks about Jesus needing help to carry his cross, that they grabbed someone to help him lift the wood up off his back, and we could not have gone anywhere without the help to lift the wood that was crushing on all of us. There were even members of our congregation who had to get cranes to get the wood off their houses, including one who had to get a crane to pull a 22-ton tree off their house. We asked questions like, how does this happen to innocent people? How do the innocent suffer? We remembered how loud it got, how the sound of rain and hail and wind beat upon us. And is that any different than how loud the sounds of Crucify him must have battered Pilate's ears? We had to take shelter. We had to run. We had to hide. And we prayed a prayer, "Dear Father, into your hands I give my life." Darkness covered the earth, and that curtain over our security and safety was ripped in two. And I think we're still trying to figure out what happened, just like the disciples must have been mystified. How did we get from Palm Sunday to Good Friday? We didn't know what had happened, but we knew something bad had happened. The truth, my friends, is that life is full of Holy Weeks. Moments when everything seems like it's going great, we're on top of the world, and then all of a sudden something happens that changes our world dramatically. Maybe it's the loss of a loved one. Maybe it's a divorce. Maybe it's a job loss. Maybe it's something like a tornado hitting. There are Holy Weeks in our lives when it goes from things being great to all of a sudden we're in the ditch and we're scared and we feel lost. And we can't imagine that we'll ever get out of the situation that we're in. As we go through this week with these highs and these lows, let's remember that. Let's remember that Holy Week, yes, happened 2,000 years ago, but Holy Week takes place all the time, all around us, to ourselves and to our neighbors. It's real, that struggle. We're not promised safe haven, but in the midst of that, let's also lay claim as the people of faith, that we also follow a Savior who knows exactly what that's like, who lived the fullness of that Holy Week. And let's also remember that we follow a God who won't leave us in the storm. And I mean that in both ways. God will ride through the storm with us, will not abandon us to that struggle, but will be right in the midst, carrying us through. And then God will not forever leave us in that storm place, but carry us to a place of hope, a place of renewal, a place where the Sunday morning sun rises, because Christ rises, and we will rise too. We will not be left without hope. We will not be left alone. When I was thinking about that time that we were all going through together, there's a moment in the midst of that for me encapsulates that we will not be left alone, and there is hope. And that was, for those of you who were here, remember the Sunday after the tornado that we had a potluck like good Methodists? And it was such a strange potluck because half of us couldn't even make food. We still didn't have electricity. But I said, the church has food. We'll buy some pans of lasagna and bring whatever you can bring, right? And we actually ran out of, this is one of the few times ever that a Methodist potluck has run out of a main dish. We ran out of lasagna. We boiled some hot dogs to get us by. But you know what we didn't run out of? Dessert. We had so many desserts. We could eat as much sweet things as we wanted to. We did not run out of dessert. And if there is ever a sign for God in the midst of struggle, it's that the potluck didn't run out of dessert, right? We kept eating of the sweetness of God and the sweetness of family and community and love for one another. It's a sign of provision in the midst of scarcity, a sign of hope in the midst of loss, a sign of love when everything felt like it fell into chaos. We were not left alone, just as how sweet that bread must have been in the midst of a week when it felt like the breath was sucked out of the earth, that Jesus stopped with his people and said, we will eat together, and I will give you my body and my blood to sustain you. And they could breathe again. So my friends, let's remember that whatever we're going through, we will get through it with Jesus. And we will get through it with each other. Because after all, we are all people who were once strangers and are now family. Thanks be to God.
Thanks for listening to the Sermon Podcast from First United Methodist Church in downtown Bentonville. If you would like to let us know you were here, follow the link below to connect. To participate in worship through giving, you can give online at fumcbentonville.org or on Venmo at FUMC Bentonville. FUMC Bentonville welcomes all. Because we believe the communion table is God's table, we invite everyone into our church family. We welcome and celebrate every race, gender, gender identity, sexual orientation, marital status, age, physical and mental ability, national origin, economic station, and political ideology. We come together in action and outreach, aspiring to follow Jesus' example of radical hospitality, love, and grace as a transformative movement in our community. Please join us for worship on Sunday mornings at 9 and 11 a.m., both in person and on Facebook Live. All are welcome, and we'd love to have you with us. Grace and peace.